For 40 years, we have been lied to about women and men, about domestic violence, about sexual assault, about privilege, about rights, even about the very idea of equality. Erin Pizzey, who founded the world's first internationally recognized battered women's shelter, has known all along that something's wrong, because she witnessed the change herself back in the early 1970s. Today, she talks to many younger men and women who have been hurt by hateful and dishonest gender ideology, and she has a question for them. When did you wake up? And how long have you been awake? And of course, what should we do about it now? Welcome to When Did You Wake Up with Erin Pizzey and her co-host, Dean Esme. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome to the Saturday, December 6th, 2014 edition of When Did You Wake Up with Erin Pizzey. I, as usual, am Erin's co-host, Dean Esme, Operations Manager at A Voice for Men, and recent author at Thought Catalog. More on that in a minute. And of course, with me, as usual, is Erin herself. How are you doing this lovely London evening, Erin?
Oh, I'm fine. It's really, really cold, and I've got my very, very hot cup of tea, as we all know, and I can't wait because I'm really looking forward to this particular show because I'm going to be talking to my favorite person, James.
Most excellent, yes. James, the man behind the curtain, who mostly just sits there silently behind our shows. We're going to make a special guest out of him today. Before we begin, though, I want to mention again whiteribbon.org and what's been going on with that. We had some terrific news last night on the heels of some terrible news about a week ago. Erin, you remember I told you that the Huffington Post had run a wonderful column. I think it was wonderful that I wrote on White Ribbon. It was
brilliant. I remember it. Very brilliant. I read it.
Well, it wasn't mean to anybody. It didn't attack anybody. All it did was announce your new whiteribbon.org site. And what actually happened is we saw it happen. It was on Twitter. Some Twitter feminists complained to another feminist who writes for Huffington Post, and that feminist publicly said, "Oh, I'm going to do something about that." And by next business morning, my column on White Ribbon was gone.
But you see, actually, Dean, let's be fair. I don't blame them for 1 minute, because if anybody's going to read whiteribbon.org, there lies the proof of the fraudulent, evil empire that has existed now for nearly 50 years. And that must be very frightening for all these radical feminists, because we're going to basically bust it all wide open.
That's exactly right. And in my column, I was very mild-mannered about it. And I also pointed out that whiteribbon.org isn't quite the only site. If you want somebody neutral, there's something out there that Marty Fiebert and a group of academics put out called The Partner Abuse State of Knowledge. Now, that's a lot more academic, but again, if you're looking for the scientific proof, there's even more there. And
it's evidence-based against all the lies, because there's actually no accurate feminist figures that anybody can trust, and there hasn't ever been.
No, there really isn't. And I saw an angry response that's been repleted a few places, especially by White Ribbon Canada. White Ribbon Canada has claimed their approach is evidence-based, but it's not.
It's not.
No, it's the same old debunked nonsense about how it's mostly men dominating women and patriarchy and all that.
But then on our site, on my site, White Ribbon, we're going to put up Dean's, what is his name? The professor from Canada, whose name...
Don Dutton?
Yeah, Don Dutton. We did a whole interview with him, and he is the recognized expert in Canada, Professor Don Dutton. So Canada White Ribbon have got it all wrong.
Yeah, they really do. And you can find that interview there, and all sorts of other good information. We've even got one of the few. You actually published a peer-reviewed paper of your own, a scientific paper of your own.
Yep, Marinated in Violence.
Which was not just your opinions, but was the first actual study of what women coming into the first women's refuge looked like, wasn't it?
It's the only study that the feminist refuges have never put out any facts or figures about women coming into their refuge.
Mm-hmm. They're afraid to.
I know.
They probably should be, because they've been they've been enabling too much. I mean, many of these women need sympathy and help, but the help that some of them need, a lot of them need, is help overcoming their own violent urges. Right?
Yeah, and their own violent childhoods. I mean, it's a tragedy that happens far too often, and the real victims are children. And these are the adult victims that are now going on to victimize their own children, both men and women, and they both need treatment and therapeutic intervention. And that's what we've always done. But we've had this hijack movement, which actually hijacked the entire feminist movement out of the hands of the equity feminists. Now, in those days, 1979, equity feminists were expressed by both men and women. It wasn't just women. But when it became the patriarchy, as they moved the goalposts, then the women turned on men. So men became understandably hostile.
Exactly.
A lot of history to get over.
We do have a lot of history and a lot of misinformation. The good news, not only does whiteribbon.org continue, and despite the rumors you may have heard, isn't collecting any donations, at least at present, it is growing in popularity. We're seeing it in the traffic rankings, especially in places like Australia. And after purging my column on it, Thought Catalog reprinted it last night, and it's up there now on Thought Catalog. If you search Thought Catalog for White Ribbon for Abuse Awareness by Dean Esme, you will find the column that the Huffington Post feminists did not want you to see and had erased. And they've also published an interesting column by there was another gentleman named Chris Good. I want to say hello to him if he's listening. He lives in London, I believe. Well, I know he lives in the UK. And they purged his pieces, and they were just critical of feminism. My piece wasn't critical of anybody. Not of feminism. It was just talking about good things that we were doing with White Ribbon. But they appear to have purged that young man just to be angry with me. So Thought Catalogs picked him up too. So I thought I would mention that. It's a much bigger publication than Huffington Post UK. So this is what you get for censorship, guys. It's a new era. You're not always going to be able to get away with that stuff anymore. So everybody, please visit Thought Catalog, THOUGHT. Look for White Ribbon for Abuse Awareness to read that column that got feminists so angry, although there's nothing there anybody should get angry about if you ask me, except the ideologues. And so there it is. And I understand you've got a team that's going to be doing a redesign too on the whiteribbon.org site, Erin.
Yes, I'm hoping, because I want to differentiate myself. The point, A Voice for Men is the leading platform for the entire men's movement of any sort, and it encourages women to be there as well. And it is a political active platform. My website, whiteribbon.org, is actually mostly going to be about evidence-based research into the generational family violence, which I've, as you know, from the very beginning always said that it is generational. It's never been anything to do with the so-called patriarchy. That was just going for funding for the feminist movement. So once we get back to talking about generational family violence and how to educate and help people who've had these appalling childhoods, we can really begin to make the difference. The tragedy, I always thought, is the idea that feminists would say that half the human race were potential rapists and batterers because they were men, left no room for anything to happen. It was appalling.
Well, the times they're changing, and it's certainly a Voice for Men is part of that. It's not the only part of it. whiteribbon.org is part of it. A number of other growing publications are part of it. We're seeing more all the time. The very fact that Thought Catalog was willing to step up and take a a stand here against censorship and supporting other points of view is a big deal. I know I'm going to be visiting Thought Catalog a lot more, just because their publishers aren't afraid. So there. Well, anyhow, so for the longest time, people who've been listening to AVfM, A Voice for Men Radio, know James Huff's voice. Now, James does mostly direct the back room on almost virtually every show on A Voice for Men Radio, with rare exception. And on most shows, he doesn't say much of anything, and when he does, usually he's giving opinions. But now, today, we're actually going to get to know the man and his story. So, James, are you there with us?
Yes, I am.
So, James, when did you wake up?
I've started waking up in March of 2010, shortly after I got out of the military. I had some very interesting experiences while I was over in Iraq. Unit morale plummeted after about 4 or 5 months over there. And when I looked, I realized it wasn't because of the mission. It was because of what was happening back home. Within just a few months, there were a couple guys in our unit who had gotten Dear John letters, or who had had their bank accounts cleaned out by their significant others or their girlfriends. And this sent a ripple throughout the entire unit. All the guys who were attached to somebody were all of a sudden going, oh, God, these are just the ones that got caught. What am I going to do? And as you can imagine, you don't want to be outside the wire with a guy who doesn't have his head in the game. He's thinking about whether or not his wife is banging Jody back home.
Or whether he's going to see his kids or not, I would think.
Right.
Yeah.
So this had a profound impact on how I looked at what was going on with military service and the idea of marriage. And once I got out of the military, popped up on Google one day and said, why do military wives cheat? Because out of a unit of 100, we had 10 separate cases. But keep that in mind. Well, a little over 100. Out of a unit of a little over 100, we had 10 separate cases of soldiers claiming infidelity on the part of their spouse or significant other. Okay?
Yeah.
That's a 10% rate in a year. That's just horrible. These are the ones that got caught. So my mind, huh? Yeah.
I'm sorry, I just said 1 in 10. Sorry.
Well, yeah. That's just nuts. So when I put the question into Google, a forum came up, and that happened to be anti-misandry. And I was using a little cell phone at the time. I hadn't gotten a new computer yet. And for the next 6 months, I was on that phone going down the rabbit hole. One simple question led me down the rabbit hole. That's how I woke up.
And what did you first think when you woke up? Did you think...
I was angry.
Yeah.
I was thinking, oh my God, this everything that I had ever been taught or I had known about the so-called fairer sex is really a crock of shit. And it took a while to start to move away from the idea of this was a problem with women in general to we need to look at it as a social ill and consider the ideologies that are floating around our culture. It took a little while for that to happen. Once I was able to gain my focus on, certain ideologies that are very unhealthy for society.
Well, can you give us some for instances?
Well, I mean, feminism. Feminism is the primary one that I focus on. I won't get into politics too much.
No, but just going to ask you, when you were actually in the military, was there much discussion or understanding of radical feminism?
Well, we had quarterly meetings that would occur at the military theater. I still remember during my first stint in the military back in '92. It was just a few years after the feminists had really started to sink their claws into the Defense Department. And everything was all of a sudden EEO this, or equal opportunity this, equal opportunity that. And they started in on running quotas for promotions of women in the military. And I still remember sitting, the first time I was sitting in there listening to one of our sergeants come back from her training and talking pure and utter crap about all the men that were in the military. This was a sergeant who came in and had a collection of privates. And after whatever training they had her do, she came back with her facts and figures and just lambasted us all. And none of us left those meetings happy.
What were you supposed to have been doing that you deserved to be lambasted like that?
We were supposed to learn how to treat women properly in the military.
So what have you been doing that she could claim that you
exactly weren't? Right. I mean, on an individual level, the guys in the unit were good guys. I mean, they treated other people with respect. Period. That's all it was. They maintained their professionalism. But she wanted to take a few of these examples that had been drilled into her head and all of a sudden spew it out over all of us and apply that nastiness to everyone she saw.
Could you argue?
No, of course not.
Why not?
Well, at the time, I didn't have any facts, figures, or real understanding of what was going on. So
presumably none of you did, really.
No. Yeah. I mean, you're talking about a lot of younger men who haven't been through college. We're talking about enlisted men for the most part. Most of them haven't been through college. Most of them are joining the military so they can go to college.
Yeah.
Just getting out of high school in most cases. Mm-hmm. And have no idea what the real world is like. And here's an individual who is in a position of authority, and you are drilled day in and day out for 8 to 9 weeks of your life that you better respect that position of authority, and that's basic training. And then you have another several weeks to several months of training to learn your occupational specialty on top of that, and you're dealing with drill sergeants and instructors who you better jump when they say jump. So when you've got an individual in the military who is in a position of authority, who walks into the room and spouts faulty facts and figures to a lot of young men and women who have no idea what's really going on.
You know what's interesting
it
me,
sinks
James?
in.
Yeah, I can see that, but what interests me, so you're going out there, over 100 of you, to lay your lives down to fight the enemy, and then suddenly this woman stands up, who's, as you say, in a position of authority, and she tells you that you're the enemy.
Yes.
That's really, really horrible.
Now, by the second time I went into the military, because I took a long break there, and then I went back into the military. I was a little bit older, a little bit wiser. I wasn't going to be kowtowed. I wasn't going to kowtow to anybody. And a lot of individuals in the unit, respected the idea that I was a grown-ass man, 30 plus years old, and that I was going to be treated as such.
Yeah.
Give deference for rank, but I'm not going to I'm not going to be intimidated. Okay. And we would go to the theater every quarter, and it would usually be a battalion function. So you had hundreds of people sitting in this theater while we were receiving safety briefs. Don't drink and drive, careful if you boat on the water, make sure your weapons are unloaded. Don't beat your wife, don't beat your kids, don't beat your dog. Literally, they and every Friday we had a safety brief that our commander and our first sergeant would lead before releasing us for the weekend. And once again, don't beat your wife, don't beat your kids, don't beat your dog. I think I heard the phrase, don't beat your husband, come out maybe twice.
That's a miracle. It's like standing up and looking at you all and saying, when did you last beat your wife, isn't it?
Yeah. And understand that, the captain and the first sergeant, their hands are tied. It's not like they can change the script very much, because they can't. And if you were to really pull them alone, get them alone and talk to them on an individual level, you take your hat off, so to speak, or take your rank off and actually talk to them as an individual. There are a lot of people who realize that it's a load of crap.
Yeah.
But policy is what it is. And so when they get up in front of that formation, they've got to give the safety brief, and part of the safety brief is don't beat your wife, kids, or dog. Or something along those lines.
Yeah.
And so every quarter, you're watching all the new guys to the unit who have already had this stuff drilled into them anyway, walk in and listen to these horror stories that they're presenting on stage, and then they walk out with long faces.
Yeah.
And all it does to a bunch of military guys who have been driven into a sense of honor and duty is jack up chivalry to the nth degree. That's exactly what it does. And so when they go out, they have no self-protection. They have no sense of self-protection when dealing with women. They begin to look at the women around them not as normal, fallible human beings, but as something they had better kiss the feet of. And then they go off to places like Iraq and Afghanistan, and they learn the hard way.
Yeah, in the refuge that I used to run in London, it was very interesting how many of the women would suddenly turn up and be sitting in this big sitting room saying, will you help me write a letter? And I'd sit down and say, oh yeah, of course I'll help you. And that was a Dear John letter, because their partner was about to come out of jail. And he hadn't been warned that she'd shacked up with somebody else. And he would get the letter. And they wonder why suicide rates are so high in prisons. Well, I can tell them.
When I first got to Fort Hood, I didn't see this so much at Fort Bragg, my first stint in. I was a little bit too self-centered to be able to notice much of what other people were doing. But when I first got to Fort Hood, and I got my car, I decided that I'd do the guys in the barracks a service, and if they paid for my meal and paid for gas, and gave me as many sodas as I wanted for the night, I'd take a group of them out to go drinking and be the designated driver. And so we're going bar hopping. This is when I first got to Fort Hood. Bar after bar after bar. And 49 Cav was the unit that I was part of. And there was another unit called 4th ID who was still deployed at the time. They hadn't come back yet.
Mm-hmm.
And you are going to these bars and you're literally watching women take off the rings as they come through the door and then hit on the guys who you're going out with. And I'm warning these guys the whole time. You don't want to mess with that. Hey, check her finger. Oh, look, she's got that telltale tan line. Either she's just divorced or she's still married and her husband is deployed right now. And then you see and hear about these individuals getting boyfriends and shacking up with them for several months, and then when their husband comes back, they'll conveniently move back home or kick the boyfriend out.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a regular occurrence. And people don't talk about it. People don't want to talk about it. For one, it's a closed community. And then on top of that, if they did talk about it, you would have the politicians who have to kowtow to feminist ideology bringing generals out into a committee to find out why the hell this is happening.
A real quick question. I don't mean to interrupt, but Erin, weren't you telling me that even 40 years ago you were seeing military wives sort of act the way that James is describing here?
Yep. Oh, yeah. Well, they all they had to do was to come into the refuge, but we were quite canny, because what they do, they'd actually want us to get in touch with the army to say that they were in the refuge, and unless they had real evidence, as far as I was concerned, I wasn't willing to do that, because even by me ringing his platoon or his unit, it would cast the aspersion on him, and he was innocent as far as I'm concerned until he was proven guilty. I had several cases of that, and as far as I was concerned, then they very quickly moved off to other shelters where they were seen as victims, and all they had to do was make an allegation, and of course the man loses his position. He's actually discharged out of the army.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And I'd seen that before.
I know.
It didn't happen very often, but once an allegation comes up, all of a sudden that guy is removed from all positions of authority. If he's a squad leader or platoon sergeant, he's out. He's put into headquarters where he sits behind a desk, and they pretty much keep him isolated until things are handled. And even if things are handled in his favor, he is usually transferred to another unit because he's already got this stain on him. He can no longer go back and work with these people, these soldiers.
What do you think could be done? I mean, in a sense, I don't know about the modern day army, but in my time, there was actually no attempt. If a man was accused of, or found that he was abroad and his wife was cheating on him and he's going to be barred out of his own house and not being able to see his children, there was nowhere for him to turn to, because they didn't have any efficient way of counseling or helping or saying, okay, well, you better go back on leave and try and see if you can sort this out. So he was just left hanging out to, as you say, the most dangerous part, because he was there probably in the middle of going into war and with pieces inside, and that's not the best way to have the guy next to you.
I'll tell you now, the military is nothing but a numbers game. Okay?
Yeah.
And I'm not speaking bad about the troops or anything like that. I'm just telling you how it is.
It is, yeah.
There is mission priority that overrides individual needs. And when a commander gets a mission, he better put his people in place. Period. Things have to get done. And you'll see less of this in garrison, but a heck of a lot more out in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. They don't have the resources to deal with this sort of thing. And even asking to use whatever resources are available, such as I need to go see a counselor, is often seen as a sign of weakness.
Yeah, I can see that.
Or we better keep an eye on this guy and make sure he doesn't put his clip in and start killing people. I mean,
which is a really, really serious possibility. What are the suicide rates like in the army these days?
Oh, God.
Awful. Imagine.
Oh. Huge.
And nobody talks about that, do they?
Within the military, there has been some more recent discussion on it, primarily because news pieces came out, particularly in 2009-2010 time frame. News pieces started coming out talking about the effects of multiple deployments on these guys, how it was tearing apart their families, how they were coming back traumatized, and how they would end up killing themselves.
Yeah.
I mean, there was even one case where I think 7 guys out of a unit of special forces at Fort Bragg ended up getting discharged or put in prison because they found out their wives had cheated on them, and they took matters into their own hands. I mean, so these guys don't have the appropriate support that they need in order to deal with those types of issues. And chances are they never will, because setting up those types of things requires actually having appropriations. And if you want to know where the money is being appropriated, it's being appropriated to the feminist hegemony that has taken over a PC political military, telling men they're pieces of crap whenever they go into a theater 4 times a year.
Well, that's what I was going to say. You see, because of the feminist ideology that says men, because they're part of the patriarchy, there's nothing you can do to help them, or you don't need to support them, because by the nature of the Y chromosome, they're essentially batterers and rapists.
Right.
Now, if you look at it the way I look at it and say, no, the fact is that generational family violence creates disabled personalities who can't make relationships. And if a man by accident gets involved with a woman who will cheat on every occasion if she can, because she has personality disorder, then the onus is not on him as a potential batterer, because that's what he's being told. So we have to look at it as it really is, as opposed to this years and years of no future for men as human beings. They're very useful fodder for our wars. They're not even now necessary to have babies. And they're wallets. So really, the role for men is to shut up and die.
And that builds a heck of a cognitive dissonance in your average soldier.
Yeah.
I know I had to jump through hoops inside my own mind whenever I would hear the types of things that I was being told, and then be expected to go out and act in an honorable and professional manner. On the one hand, I'm being told I'm a horrible person. On the other hand, I'm expected to be a hero. And it made me wonder often whether or not I was nothing more than a beast of burden. As if my only function in life, the only redeemable quality that I had, was to die. And that is a very unhealthy way to have a human being live for 4 to 20 years. of their life.
Well, apart from anything else, there is no sense of self in a human being that believes they're worthless, and that's when this is the thing that most bothers me about this. You know, we know the suicide figures for men are horrendous, particularly when they're at war, away from their families, in prison or whatever. But nobody thinks it's important, actually, because men are no longer, and the suffering of men is no longer important. What frightens me is when men come out, having served their time in Afghanistan and Iraq and other places, when the wife wants to get rid of, the girlfriend wants to get rid of him, all she has to say is that he has become a killer because he's been in the army and he's traumatized. Therefore, he's dangerous to his children. End of.
Yes, and I had seen that happen before. Guys trying to get custody. The judge looks at his combat record, and nope, can't see the kids. But hey, what you can do is you can move back into the barracks after your wife gets the house and moves her new boyfriend in. You can move back into the barracks, and the barracks life isn't that pleasant, trust me. It's improved over the years, but unless you're in the U.S. Air Force, it's not that pleasant.
Yeah, I can believe you.
So you're, and if you're a sergeant or above, usually you don't get dispensation to live in the barracks, so you're living in a hovel off post, paying out the yin-yang for child support and alimony and everything else, and you can't get out of the military at that point. You can't.
Yeah, because your other alternative, if you get out, you can't make the alimony, then you're in jail.
Exactly. So I've seen this happen where young men will go in, they will get married, they're have a couple kids, things go south, they can't get out because they don't have the skills in a civilian world to be able to make the same type of money that they were making in the military. And so they're stuck. They are stuck.
Okay, James, let's look for some solutions. What do you suggest?
I honestly don't know where to begin other than to say it is up to people like us to keep doing what we are doing. Because the military is closed. The military is not something you're going to be able to break into easily.
No, I agree. I absolutely agree.
It's going to have to change from the politicians who appropriate or who decide what's being appropriated to the military. So that is where you have to begin.
And also, I imagine that if we can break this deadlock, which is the hold that the radical feminists, as you say, has over the military, and to a certain extent everywhere. Because I've just been noticing recently in England, we're getting some quite big headlines about rape in the army. Of the women going into the army are subject to all this harassment and sexual tension and blasphemy and all the rest of it, which just adds to more alienating of the men who have to work around them.
Absolutely. I did not see a woman who was going to go in and talk to a male sergeant or officer go in without another woman present.
Because he's so dangerous.
Actually, it was the other way around. Actually, it was on requirement of the sergeant or the commander that this occur, because she is so dangerous.
Really? But it is not put that way, is it?
No, it's not put that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, you'll often have that sense. You'll get that sense where okay, well, we've got a troublemaker here. We need to, bring her in and have a talk with her. But you can't talk to her behind a closed door alone. You're going to have someone else there to witness everything that goes on between the commander and the first sergeant and this individual. That's assuming that the person in authority is a man.
How do you get a morale? How do you make and build your platoon into a sufficient fighting force when this is all going on within the minds and the behavior of the 100 or so men and women? It must be the most terrifying concept.
It is it's a challenge. You'll find a lot of these guys sort of move toward each other. We'll have our own little cliques, so to speak. I mean, I hung out with, the video game guys, and, we had other people in the unit hang out with guys who like going to the gym and comparing muscles, or playing sports, So, I mean, you've got.
But that's not what camaraderie is about. The whole thing is the whole unit is supposed to be this very efficient, emotionally powerful force of men and women. That's the idea behind it. Not that women should come in and then make it a danger zone within the platoon, let alone without.
Well, this is why you have, especially during deployment, when these guys are hanging out, they hang out in these very tight-knit groups. And then you have your award ceremonies, you have your cookouts, you have things like that. It's a balm that does nothing but lessen the pain of the burn. It doesn't heal the burn. And this is exactly how they've been moving for a very long time now. It's holding together, but for how long?
Yeah, until actually men decide it's not worth it to even risk going into the military.
Right.
And then, of course, they'll force them.
Right.
Well, no, you have to laugh, don't you? Because it's so dire. But in the 21st century, we can look at this huge chasm between men and women, the destruction of the family, the destruction of boys, the allegations that all men are potential rapists and batterers, and you think to yourself, how did this happen? It's like the Dark Ages again.
Well, this is a problem that is systemic in every branch of the military in the U.S. Probably the least so in the Marines.
Really?
Is that because it's harder for women to actually get into the Marines because it's so tough?
Well, it's harder for them to get into the more of the closer to frontline units. Okay, I was in a support unit. We did transportation, and we had mechanics. So transportation and maintenance was our primary job. We had women and men working side by side. And, there were only a couple women that I can say I had any issue with, and a few more men who I had issue with than women. So, I mean, personality conflicts, lazy soldiers, things of that nature, all that comes into play. People are people.
Yeah.
And so the issue wasn't whether or not I was working next to a woman. The issue was what policies were put in place.
Yeah.
That would allow abuse of power.
Yes. Well, because go on, sorry, Dean. Go ahead.
Well, I wanted to ask James about something, especially because we're getting near the end of the show. I remember when you first got involved in the men's issues movement, one of the big projects you were well known for, and this is something I don't even think you know about, Erin, is
Okay.
James was responsible for something called the Agent Orange Files. And I know this will fascinate you, and it's been long enough, a lot of people have forgotten it, although it's permanently on A Voice for Men, and it's in our recommended readings section. James, tell us about what that is, and tell Erin about it, and just talk about it, please.
Sure, I'll give you guys a general idea of how I came up with the idea. In May of 2011, late May of 2011, I had finally collected enough data to make a decision, and I jumped in and decided to help. But I needed to know how, and I started doing some research, and I found Mumsnet.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Certainly did not like the way that they were handling things, and I came up with what I called a Mumsnet mission brief. Essentially entailed using a team to go in and begin answering questions in an anti-feminist manner and identifying, not as MRAs or anti-feminists, but as egalitarian. Two guys, me and one other, went in and started doing that, and we set that place on fire for a couple weeks. And we ticked off a lot of people. We probably went through, 2 or 3 dozen accounts during that time. So that was the basis for what I did with the Agent Orange files. I was looking at Feudelbogen's site, the Counter-Feminist, and I saw this screen cap that somebody had pulled from radfemspeak.net, which was located in Australia. That's where it was homed at. And it was quite a telling quote. I forget exactly what it was now, but I decided to go find this place. And I did, and found out that registration was private. You actually had to email the admin in order to get registered. And I did that and used a fake name and immediately built Facebook and Twitter account to go along with the name, developed an entire persona. I'm a role-playing geek, so go figure. Developed an entire persona and history for this radical feminist. And I went into these forums, and I started reading everything, and I said, oh my gosh, this is a treasure trove of hate beyond belief. And I started pulling all of their forums in PNG and PDF format. And after a couple weeks, I applied for sort of a let me into the back room sort of position. Not an admin or anything like that, but they had a private section on the private forums, and I wanted to get into those. So I requested for that, and they said, oh, you're so wonderful. Blah, blah, blah. Yeah, sure, you can go in. And oh, my God, it was even deeper level of hate. I thought I had seen the bottom of the rabbit hole, and then I found out there were 100 rabbits living underneath that. And I started pulling all that information. And it was, once I compiled all of it, I spoke to quite a few noted members within the men's rights movement and said, can we publish? And they said, well, that would be great. And then one individual, who I won't name, said, why stop there? Why not begin to connect these screen names to real names? So we held off for a month, and that's exactly what we did. Hours every single day, pouring through all this hate, looking for clues and finding real names to match screen names. And what we found was shocking. There were lobbyists. There was a lobbyist in the UK. There teachers, professors, authors.
Yeah.
I mean, these were people who had influence in their respective communities.
Absolutely, and power. I have a lot of personal experience of feminist editors in publishing, radical feminist, and, well, in international publishing. And they would try and force you as an author into writing anti-male, anti-marriage books.
Mm-hmm.
And you would be thrown out if you refused to comply. I was thrown out of a lot of publishing houses. Yeah, I mean, it is very frightening when you suddenly realize that the woman standing in front of you doesn't have to say anything, but you choose her as an attorney, and you might find yourself as a man in terrible trouble, because her politics will override her sense of compassion, if she has any at all.
But we are literally talking about posts saying kill all men.
Yeah.
Let's boil them down and turn them into glue. Let's re-engineer them into docile beasts.
Wasn't one woman a daycare worker who was talking about how women could just get rid of the male population by mothers simply no longer, letting babies die. Yeah, no longer feeding them. Yeah,
absolutely. There was even an entire thread.
But I think the important thing, though, for everyone who's listening, is to say and keep reminding, most normal women are not like that. Now, I know most of the leaders of the early movement in the women's liberation movement in those early days, and I promise you, most of them were incredibly dysfunctional women, and they found a way, a source of having power and control, and they are sadists, a lot of them. And so anybody who actually can say, I believe in the patriarchy, is also saying, I hate half the human race. Now, we do know that anybody who can say that and believe it is seriously disturbed as far as I'm concerned.
This really let me know that these women were not in a vacuum. These radical feminist women were not living in a vacuum. Once I started connecting names to what these people were saying inside of a private forum to each other, people from all over the world who have power and influence in their communities. Once I started looking at that, it really hit me in the gut. And then in December of 2011, we published. And A Voice for Men and Anti-Misandry was kind enough to take it up. Anti-Misandry hosted the PNG version of the files for a long time. And then the next year, at the same time, we re-released the files in PDF format. And it caused a huge ruckus. In fact, it was the release of the Agent Orange files that put us on the map with the SPLC.
Which is, what's the SPLC?
The Southern Poverty Law Center. It was,
right, yeah.
It was the release of the Agent Orange files that catalyzed the response by the SPLC, and I think it's played an important role, or it played an important role a couple years ago, toward sort of pushing us more into the light.
Do you think it's time to actually reissue all this? Because I don't want it to disappear.
Oh, it's still available. I've got my own archives, of course, and it is available
How can people find it?
AVfM. They can look up the article Happy Birthday Radfem Scum on AVfM. They can also look up Radfem Hub, the underbelly of a hate movement. That article on A Voice for Men at the bottom will have links to all three parts of the Agent Orange files. I had to split them into three parts due to WordPress's limitations on file sizes. There's 200 and some odd megabytes of information that are there. And if you know how to search through PDFs all at one time, you can literally look up how many times they mention kill all men or castrate or rape or anything else.
And the thing is, as you say, the most terrifying thing about all this is not just some scum living in some ghetto somewhere. These are women in huge powers of positions, certainly in England, ministers in our government, for instance, in our judiciary, in all the places where their lust for power gives them huge power over very vulnerable men. And that is what is so frightening, because no one would suspect them of that, because unless you were able to do what you did, because you are a geek, as you say, this information would never become public.
Username YBOWife. If you want the real name, you can go look it up on with the Agent Orange files. But username YBOWife is a lobbyist in the UK who was instrumental in formulating legislation to be put up to remove women from prisons.
Oh yes,
What's her name?
Her real name?
Yeah.
The one
I didn't have to say her real name.
Lamia Markton.
And there's also, and along with her, because they're justice for women, these women, and they actually believe that any woman who kills a partner, a male partner, is a political prisoner and therefore should not be imprisoned because it isn't murder.
Right.
And because it's the patriarchy who've oppressed her. So they actually, most of them are barristers and they're attorneys. And so that's what they do. They actually make it as far as possible. They also have successfully removed the law of provocation so that men can't use it as what happened when they suddenly lose it and kill a partner. So that's gone. But women can kill a man even if it's premeditated, because, I don't know if you know this, but women are slow burners. So it isn't premeditated, it's just that they are murderous over a longer period of time.
What do you mean by that, Erin?
I mean that if a woman kills a partner and they claim the battered wife syndrome, which is actually first voiced by a very well-known mad feminist called Leonora Walker, she's out of Colorado. The battered wife syndrome means that she can kill because she's been oppressed and abused for so long, and because women don't explode with rage like men do, they implode, then she's not guilty and she can't be accused of murder. Just come quiet, everybody.
Yeah, well, it's astounding that basically women get one standard and men get a completely different standard. Not that anybody here, I know this will get taken out of context, not that anybody here thinks it's justifiable to lose your temper and kill your wife or husband. It's what's astounding is that the double standard, it makes no sense. It's almost like they want more violence.
But Dean, it's all a double standard because, if a woman makes an allegation, she has to be believed. A man won't be believed.
Well, I'll tell you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'll tell you, we've seen crazy start to really come out of the woodwork over the last couple of years because these individuals know that they can't hide as easily now. There are other people right now doing exactly what I did, collecting information, going on these private boards and forums. Some of them are even moving into administration positions and shutting these places down one by one. In what I mean by that is it sort of becomes this cold, dark heart where they push out all the all the people who may have reason left in them, and then allow the rest to scream into an echo chamber. So there are people out there who think highly of the men's rights movement, who are doing the types of things that I have done before.
That's wonderful.
Oh, I can verify. We actually know for a fact in academia and a number of organizations, there are feminist critics, men's rights activists in their 20s and 30s who are already in these organizations and making note of things and being quiet for now. Yeah. And if any of the radfems in charge in those places are feeling paranoid, so be it. It's the truth. They're graying. They're graying, and they're not going to be in charge forever. They're just not.
No, they're not. No, and there's a newer, younger, sane generation of women coming up who actually don't want to be part of any of this. And there's awful women of my generation who got involved on the grounds of equity feminism, and also men at the time, who had it hijacked, and they've been around a long time. You know what, James? You've cheered me up enormously. You're a brave man, and your work is absolutely fantastic. I'm so glad I've had this time to really talk to you.
Well, thank you very much, Erin.
So I guess it's about time we wrap the show up. It has been a pleasure listening to you speak, James. As always, we don't get to see the man behind the curtain quite enough, except on Tales from the Infrared, where he sometimes... I can't wait to talk about Walking Dead with you next week. My goodness, what an ending. But on Tales from the Infrared. We'll be back here in 2 weeks. Paul Elam has requested the pleasure of your interview, Erin, so we'll probably have Paul on.
Wow, that's going to be interesting.
It should be. And then we also have an interesting lady who's shown up. It'll be the first woman on the new show, an interesting woman from Australia who's... we
had one. We had a woman a couple of weeks ago. Do you remember?
Oh, goodness gracious. Even I'm aging. I can't remember. I thought that was the old Revelations show. But
no, it wasn't. It was, I do know her name so well. That I can call age. 75, you can make mistakes, and you just say it's senior citizen moment, everybody. Laurie Couture.
Oh, you're absolutely right. How could I forget? I just exchanged some email with her, too. Lovely woman. Her son sent me a video that we're going to be posting on A Voice for Men. I'm also going to mention, real quick, not only see us next week on Tales from the Infrared, where James will be there and encouraged to give some opinions on television and geekery. Also, if you go to Paul Elam's channel, go on YouTube. Go to YouTube and look for something called ICMI 14, which stands for International Conference on Men's Issues, which Erin was at, and yep. ICMI 14, look for the name Terrence Popp. Terrence, Popp, with P-O-P-P. He had an amazing, I only mention it because he was also in the military, and it was an amazing presentation on military men suiciding, and I'm sure James had a real hard time even watching it. But in any case, that's incredibly worth watching. And by the way, the Washington Post did a terrifically horrid hit piece on it. Very shameful. They should be ashamed. Go watch that presentation. In any case, I think that's about enough. See you in 2 weeks, Erin.
Okay, bye-bye. Thank you so much, James. That was wonderful.
Thank you.
Take us home, James. You have been listening to When Did You Wake Up with Erin Pizzey. We would like to thank James Huff, Paul Elam, and the A Voice for Men community for their support of this show. If you like what you hear and would like to continue to hear more, donations can be made on the front page of A Voice for Men. That's www.avoiceformen.com. Our theme music is Space 1990B by Kevin MacLeod of Incompetech.com. That's INCOMPETECH.com. And is licensed under Creative Commons Attribution License 3.0. And will be noted in the show notes on YouTube. Thank you for listening.